Who does this vehicle belong to?
You've already got me out of the car. What exactly are you stopping me for now?
I'm looking at a vehicle that doesn't sit right.
That is not a legal reason.
You're not helping yourself.
I'm standing here
Where'd you get
cooperating.
it? Assigned by
Tell
who?
me what to do.
Then stop saying stolen before you've checked anything.
I'm seeing.
A sheriff's deputy thought he had an easy arrest in front of him. He was wrong. He pulled over a black woman in a government SUV, decided the vehicle might be stolen, and started treating her like a suspect before he had his facts straight. He talked over her. He ignored procedure. He pushed the stop harder every minute. What he didn't know was simple. The woman behind the wheel was Renee Talbot, a high-ranking FBI director. By the time he realized that, the damage was already done. Bodycam was running, witnesses were watching. His own report was about to fall apart. Stay with this one. It started as a roadside stop and turned into a federal problem fast. Before we get into it, drop where you're watching from. City, state, country, wherever. And if you watch these stories for the power shift, the bad judgment, and the moment officials realize they picked the wrong person, hit like and subscribe. Renee Talbot wasn't local. She had been in the county for a public safety coordination meeting and was driving back toward Atlanta in an FBI-issued SUV. She was 47, black, disciplined, and used to pressure. She had spent years inside federal law enforcement and had reached a level where she didn't need to prove anything to roadside ego. She knew policy. She knew constitutional limits. She knew exactly how a legitimate stop should sound in the first 30 seconds. This one didn't sound right from the start. The deputy was Owen Grady, mid-30s, sheriff's office. Too comfortable with his own authority. He had been working a highway corridor that locals already complained about. Same pattern over and over. Aggressive traffic stops, weak explanations, a lot of suspicious vehicle language, a lot of black drivers saying the same thing later. The stop had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with fishing. That evening, Talbot exited onto a state route near a gas station and strip of service roads. Grady pulled out behind her and stayed there long enough to make it clear he was watching her before he hit the lights. She pulled over cleanly. He walked up already charged up. Not calm, not neutral. He opened with a lane violation, then almost immediately drifted into a different theory. He said the SUV fit indicators tied to possible auto theft. That was a serious claim. The problem was that he had nothing solid to support it. He hadn't confirmed the vehicle was stolen. He hadn't tied it to a bolo. He hadn't described a clear equipment issue. He had a black woman in a federal-style SUV and decided that was enough to start pushing. Talbot gave him what the law required. License, basic compliance. Nothing extra. Grady didn't stay with the traffic stop. He started pressing her about where she got the vehicle, who it belonged to, where she was coming from, and why she seemed nervous. She wasn't nervous. He needed her to be nervous, because that would help him sell the stop later. That's how weak stops usually work. The officer starts with something thin, then tries to build suspicion out of tone, hesitation, silence, or presence. Grady was doing all of it. Talbot stayed calm and asked him to clarify the reason for the stop. He didn't tighten his explanation. He widened it. Said he was seeing inconsistencies. Said her answers weren't helping. Said the vehicle issue was now his main concern. He was trying to move from roadside stop to suspected felony without carrying the evidence needed to justify that jump. He also made a big mistake early. He acted like her questions were disrespect. They weren't. They were basic. But once he decided she wasn't going to shrink for him, his tone changed. He stopped sounding like an officer checking facts and started sounding like a man trying to win a control battle. Talbot noticed every piece of it. She noticed he never gave a stable basis for the stop. She noticed he kept switching between traffic enforcement and theft suspicion. She noticed he was talking more than he was listening. She noticed he was trying to force pressure into the stop instead of procedure. She also knew she was being watched through a racial lens. That part was obvious. A black woman in a newer government SUV on a county road was enough for him to assume criminality before verification. If she'd looked different, there's a strong chance the stop never would have gone this way. Cars kept passing. A couple of people at the gas station across the road had started paying attention. One woman had her phone up. That mattered later. Grady asked if there were weapons in the vehicle. That question by itself wasn't unusual. The way he used it was, he wasn't securing a stop. He was stacking pressure. He wanted a bigger reason to search. He wanted her to say something he could twist. Talbot gave him a controlled answer and kept it tight. He then told her to step out. At that point, he was leaning hard into the stolen vehicle angle. He said the SUV might be unlawfully possessed and suggested she needed to stop making things difficult. He was saying possible grand theft auto now, like he had already proven it. He hadn't. He was guessing out loud and using the badge to cover the gap. That's the part that wrecked him. Not just the stop, the confidence. He acted like accusation was evidence. Talbot asked for his name and badge number. He gave it, but his tone got worse. Then he called for backup. That call would later matter because dispatch audio captured how quickly he escalated the stop and how little actual information he had. Grady asked again who owned the SUV. Talbot told him, in a measured way, that the vehicle was federally assigned. He didn't accept that. He treated it like a Dodge. He told her people made claims like that all the time. That line aged badly. She reached into her bag slowly and told him she had official identification. He told her to keep her hands where he could see them, then let her retrieve it after another warning. He was still talking like he had a car thief in front of him. Then she handed over the credentials. Not a local pass, not a generic work ID. FBI credentials. Grady looked down, saw the seal, saw the name, saw the title. Renee Talbot, Executive Assistant Director. He froze for a second. Not long, just long enough. Everything changed right there. His voice dropped. His posture changed. The theft talk stopped. The hard edge disappeared. He suddenly wanted the stop to sound routine. He suddenly wanted patience. He suddenly wanted a reset that didn't exist anymore. Talbot didn't help him. She stayed calm and asked if his body camera was active. Then she asked whether his supervisor was on the way. Now he knew what had happened. He hadn't just made a bad stop. He had accused a senior federal official of grand theft auto on no solid basis, ignored federal credentials until it was too late, and done it while escalating a stop that already looked contaminated by profiling. Backup was coming. A supervisor was coming. And the deputy who thought he had found an easy roadside bust was standing there realizing he might have just ended his own career. Supervisor Wade Kerr arrived a few minutes later. Deputy Grady handed him the credentials. Kerr looked at them, looked at Talbot, and understood the problem right away. This was not an ordinary driver. This was a senior FBI official, and the stop had already gone too far. Grady tried to fix it. He stopped talking about grand theft auto. He stopped acting like the SUV was stolen. His tone changed completely. Now he wanted the stop to sound routine. Just a quick check. Just caution. Just a misunderstanding. It was too late for that. Talbot stayed calm. She asked if both body cameras were recording. She asked for their full names and badge numbers. She asked whether the original reason for the stop and the theft accusation would both appear in the report. Those questions put pressure on both deputies. Kerr tried to settle it down. He said they could clear it up and move on. He said Grady had just been careful. He said there had been theft concerns in the area. Talbot didn't accept that. She pointed out the problem clearly. Grady had given more than one reason for the stop. He had escalated to a stolen vehicle accusation before verifying anything. He had treated her like a suspect first and checked facts later. That was the key issue. Then she gave them the vehicle paperwork. It matched. The SUV was federally assigned. There was no theft report, no conflict, no real basis for the accusation. That stripped the stop down to what it really was, a weak stop, a fast escalation, a deputy who guessed wrong and pushed anyway. Kerr saw it. He changed his wording, too. He stopped defending the theft claim and started talking about review and procedure. That usually means one thing: the roadside stop is over, and the paperwork problem is starting. Talbot asked for the case number. Kerr gave it to her. She then told him the stop would be formally reported and all footage, dispatch audio, and written records needed to be preserved. That landed hard. Grady barely spoke after that. He knew the stop had collapsed. A few minutes earlier, he had been acting like he controlled the scene. Now he was standing there, hoping the damage would stop growing. It didn't. Talbot left the scene and documented everything that night. Timeline, statements, reason changes, theft accusation, credential reveal, supervisor response, evidence sources. By the next morning, the stop was no longer just a local mistake. It was becoming a federal case. The county tried to contain it the next morning. The sheriff's office announced an administrative review and treated the stop like a normal complaint. That didn't hold. Too much evidence already existed, and too many people had seen the shift in Grady's behavior once he read Talbot's credentials. Federal officials moved quickly. They sent preservation notices for everything tied to the stop: bodycam footage, dispatch audio, CAD logs, GPS records, supervisor notes, any report written that night, any message sent between deputies, supervisors, or command staff after the stop ended. That changed the stakes. Now, the issue is not only whether Grady made a bad stop, the issue is whether he made it without a valid basis, escalated it without evidence, and treated Talbot as a criminal because she was a black woman in a government SUV. The footage hurt him immediately. It showed him changing reasons for the stop. He started with a traffic claim, then shifted into suspicion, then jumped to a possible stolen vehicle accusation. He did not verify the theft claim before using it as pressure. That was the main problem. He acted first and looked for support later. The written report made things worse. It softened his language. It cleaned up the stop. It made him sound more careful than he had been on camera. Investigators noticed the gap right away. That raised a second question. Not just misconduct, truthfulness. Internal Affairs then pulled Grady's older stops. That opened another door. They found the same pattern more than once. Weak reasons, broad suspicion language, fast escalation, long questioning that had little to do with the original stop. Black drivers appeared in that pattern again and again. One stop can be defended as a mistake. A pattern is harder to explain. Supervisor Kerr had his own problem. He had a chance to correct the stop on scene once the facts were clear. He didn't do it. He tried to smooth it over and move on. Investigators saw that as a supervisor protecting a deputy instead of protecting the process. Then the DOJ stepped in harder. Subpoenas went out for stop data, complaint files, body cam retention records, training records, and internal communications from Grady's unit. The investigation widened beyond one deputy. Federal reviewers wanted to know whether the sheriff's office had allowed this kind of policing to continue for years. That's when the department's first defense collapsed. At first, a command staff said Grady acted in good faith. They said he was cautious. They said he had reasonable concerns. The evidence did not support that version. The video showed escalation without verification. The dispatch audio showed no confirmed theft basis before the accusation. The witness videos showed his whole tone changing after he learned who Talbot was. That contrast destroyed the local narrative: aggressive before the reveal, careful after. Investigators understood what that meant. Grady had not suddenly become professional. He had realized the person he targeted knew the law, knew the system, and could document every failure. By the end of that week, the stop was no longer a local embarrassment. It had become a federal civil rights investigation into one deputy, one supervisor, and one sheriff's office that looked far too comfortable with stops like this. And the county knew the worst part. Talbot had not exposed them by making a speech. She had exposed them by staying calm, preserving the evidence, and letting their own records tell the story. The fallout hid in layers. First came Grady. Internal Affairs finished its first review and found the stop was not supported the way he claimed. He had used shifting reasons, escalated to a stolen vehicle accusation without verification, and changed his story in the written report. That alone was enough to sink him. Then investigators added the larger issue. The stop showed signs of profiling, not just bad judgment, biased judgment. He was pulled from duty, then fired. That still wasn't the end. The State Certification Board reviewed the case after the federal findings moved forward. Once they saw the footage, the report problems, and the stop history pattern, they moved to strip his law enforcement certification. That meant he did not just lose one job. He lost the ability to keep working as an officer. Kerr was next. He was not the one who started the stop, but he helped turn a bad stop into a department problem. He had facts in front of him and chose to protect the deputy first. Investigators call that a failure of supervision and a failure to intervene. He was disciplined, removed from field oversight, and later forced out. Then the department itself took the bigger hit. The DOJ did not treat the stop as one isolated event. The records showed too much. Complaint histories, stop data, camera reviews, internal messages. The picture was ugly. Grady's unit had a pattern. Black drivers were being stopped on weak grounds more often than the department wanted to admit. Supervisors were signing off on reports that cleaned up shaky stops after the fact. Training existed on paper, but enforcement was weak. That is what turned one stop into a federal civil rights case. The county had to sign an oversight agreement. That came with outside monitoring, stop data audits, stricter body cam retention rules, and mandatory review of stops based on broad suspicion claims. Deputies could no longer rely on vague language and expect it to slide through. If they said a vehicle looked suspicious, they had to explain why in detail and match it to actual facts. Supervisors had to review those stops faster and more closely. The county also had to change traffic stop procedure. Officers were required to document the original reason for every stop before expanding it. If they shifted from a traffic matter to a criminal suspicion, they had to show when that happened and what facts justified it. That sounds basic. It should have already been happening, it wasn't. Talbot filed a civil rights claim too. That part mattered because it forced the county to answer in court, not just in press statements. Her case focused on unlawful detention, profiling, and the false criminal accusation. The county settled after the evidence became too strong to fight cleanly. The amount got attention, but the bigger issue was the admission built into the settlement. They paid because they knew the stop could not survive full public review. Talbot handled the aftermath the same way she handled the stop. Calm, precise, no grandstanding. She did not build her credibility by being emotional. She built it by documenting everything, preserving the evidence, and refusing to let the department rewrite what happened. That was the real power shift. Grady thought the badge on his chest decided the scene. It didn't. Facts did. Records did. Video did. Once those locked in, his authority meant nothing. That's the lesson here. A lot of bad stops survive because the person targeted is isolated, stressed, or unsure of the rules. Grady counted on that. He thought he could control the roadside, control the language, and control the report. He ran into someone who knew exactly what he was doing and knew how to make it follow him back to the office. That ended his career. It also changed the county. Not because the department wanted to reform, because exposure forced it. By 2026, the Talbot stop was being cited in training discussions, policy reviews, and police accountability debates well outside that county. Not because an FBI director got pulled over, because the stop showed the whole pattern in one clean sequence. Weak reason, fast escalation, false accusation, tone change after status reveal. Then the paperwork cleanup attempt. It was all there. And once people saw it, nobody could pretend they didn't understand what had happened. That deputy thought he had found an easy target. He found the worst possible person to test with a bad stop. What do you think would have happened if Talbot had been an ordinary driver with no rank, no federal access, and no way to lock down the evidence that fast? A lot of people already know that answer. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with someone who follows police accountability cases. And subscribe if you want more stories where power gets tested, records get pulled, and the truth wins in the end.
What are you doing in here?
Shopping.
Try again.
I'm here on official business and I'm not a threat to this store.
Then maybe you should have thought about that before acting shady.
Acting shady?
People said you were watching customers.
I'm observant. That's not a crime.
ID, right now.
I'll show you credentials, but you need to stop doing this in front of everyone.
Then why do you sound nervous?
Because you walked in here acting like you already picked the bad guy.
A patrol officer with a bad attitude thought he was putting a regular shopper in his place at a grocery store. He had no idea he was threatening an undercover Secret Service agent in the middle of an active assignment. That decision didn't end with a warning or an awkward apology. It turned into a $5 million lawsuit that wrecked his job and dragged his whole department into public embarrassment. Tell me where you're watching from. State, city, country, wherever. And if you watch stories about abuse of power, accountability, and officials ruining themselves with their own ego, like the video and subscribe. This started when the situation was already going wrong. Officer Kyle Dugan had walked a calm scene and made it hostile in less than a minute. He stood too close, spoke too loud, and acted like he was dealing with a threat instead of a man buying a few items after work. The man he targeted didn't react the way Dugan wanted. He stayed composed. He answered carefully. He didn't flinch, panic, or start begging to be left alone. Dugan took that personally. The shopper was Brent Cole. Brent was 42 and worked for the Secret Service. Not in uniform, not in a visible role. He was on protective intelligence duty, connected to a federal visit planned for the next day. His job that week was simple on paper and serious in practice. Stay unnoticed, watch patterns, flag problems early. Don't attract attention unless there's no other choice. That afternoon, he stopped at a grocery store near the hotel corridor tied to the event route. It was an ordinary stop. Water, coffee, a few snacks, then back out. Nothing dramatic happened until someone decided he looked wrong for the space. Brent had spent years training himself to notice details. Entrances, exits, loitering, changes in behavior. Anybody in that line of work does it automatically. In the wrong setting, that kind of awareness gets misread fast. One customer noticed him scanning the front of the store more than once. Another mentioned that he seemed watchful. By the time the store called local police, the report had already turned into the usual nonsense. A suspicious man, hanging around, watching people, maybe casing the place. No theft, no threats, no disturbance. Just a vague complaint dressed up like public safety. Dugan arrived ready to dominate the scene, not understand it. He came through the front entrance with the kind of body language that says he had already picked the bad guy. The store manager, Nina Patel, pointed out Brent near self-checkout. He had a basket in hand and hadn't raised his voice once. Dugan didn't start with basic questions. He went straight into commands and demands. He wanted Brent to explain why he was there, why he had been watching customers, why he seemed nervous, why he wasn't answering fast enough. Brent answered in a controlled way. He said he was working in an official capacity and that there was no threat to the store. He kept it narrow because that's what trained people do. They don't expose an assignment in public to satisfy a local officer's mood. He also knew a smart officer would hear that answer, lower the temperature, and move the conversation somewhere private. Dugan did the opposite. He pushed harder. He wanted a full explanation in the middle of the store. He treated caution like disrespect. That's where this case really began. Not with a safety concern, with ego. Dugan didn't like that Brent stayed calm and didn't hand him instant submission. Nina Patel saw it too. She stepped in and told Dugan the customer hadn't caused a problem. He hadn't argued with staff. He hadn't stolen anything. He hadn't threatened anyone. Dugan brushed that off like it didn't matter. That detail came back to hurt him later because it showed he wasn't missing facts. He was ignoring them. Brent then gave him a clean way out. He said he was federal law enforcement and could identify himself privately. That should have ended the stop. A competent officer would have moved the contact away from the crowd, verified credentials, and closed it out. Dugan heard the word federal and got more aggressive. He acted like Brent had challenged him instead of trying to resolve the encounter. That shift matters. Once Dugan decided this was about his authority, facts stopped helping. He told Brent to come outside. Brent went with him because making a scene inside a crowded grocery store was the last thing he wanted. A few customers were already watching. One had started recording near the entrance. Nina stayed close enough to see what happened next. Outside, Dugan got sharper and louder. He stood near his patrol unit and pressed Brent again for answers. Brent moved carefully, told him he had official credentials, and presented them in a controlled way. He didn't flash them around. He didn't make a speech. He gave Dugan another chance to do his job properly. Dugan looked at the credentials and rejected them almost immediately. That was the moment everything got expensive. He didn't inspect them like a professional. He dismissed them like a man who had already gone too far to admit he was wrong. He treated real federal identification as fake and started talking like Brent was trying to bluff his way out of trouble. Brent told him calmly that the credentials were legitimate and could be verified. Dugan didn't slow down. He escalated. That's the problem with officers like this. They think confidence equals accuracy. It doesn't. It just makes the mistake louder. Brent kept giving him options. Verify the ID, call a supervisor, contact the number attached to the credentials. Dugan ignored all of it. He reframed the whole encounter around control. In his head, Brent wasn't a federal agent trying to handle the contact professionally. He was a man who needed to be put in place. By then, Dugan had moved past investigation. He was trying to win. People inside the store could see enough through the front windows to know this wasn't normal. The customer recording stayed fixed on the parking lot. Nina watched Dugan's posture change from aggressive to openly confrontational. Brent knew what was coming before anyone else there did. He had seen that pattern before. An insecure officer gets challenged in public, then doubles down because backing off feels worse than being wrong. Dugan made the worst choice available to him. He put his hands on an undercover Secret Service agent and started an unlawful detention. Once Dugan put his hands on Brent, the whole thing moved from bad judgment to a legal problem. He turned Brent towards the patrol unit and told him he was being detained while he sorted out the fake ID issue. That claim had no real basis. Dugan had no evidence the credentials were fake. He had no report of a crime. He had no witness saying Brent had threatened anyone or tried to access a restricted area. He just had his own opinion, and he treated that like probable cause. Brent didn't fight him. He didn't pull away. He told Dugan again that the credentials were real, that this could be verified quickly, and that Dugan needed to slow down. Dugan heard all of that and kept going. He put Brent in handcuffs anyway. That was the first clear Fourth Amendment problem. A detention like that needs facts. Dugan had none worth standing on. Then he made it worse. He searched Brent after cuffing him. Pockets, waistband area, jacket, bag. He said it was for officer safety and investigation. Officers say that all the time when they need cover for a search. They can't justify cleanly. In this case, it looked even worse because Brent had already presented government credentials and had not made a single threatening move. Dugan found a second credential wallet, a government phone, and assignment-related items that should have told any reasonable officer to stop and verify before doing anything else. Instead, Dugan treated every official-looking item as proof that Brent was running a scam. That's how deep he was into his own story. He wasn't reading the facts anymore. He was forcing the facts to fit his ego. Brent stayed measured. That helped him later. He told Dugan that detention was unlawful. He told him the credentials would check out. He told him there were federal supervisors who could confirm his status immediately. Dugan answered the way officers answer when they've decided disrespect is the real offense. He acted like every calm correction was one more reason to tighten control. That part matters because juries and investigators look closely at tone. Dugan wasn't confused. He was offended. Nina Patel had stepped farther outside by then. She still wasn't interfering. She was watching. A customer near the entrance was still recording. Another shopper had started recording from farther out in the lot. Dugan either didn't notice or didn't care. Some officers think Bodycam solves everything for them. It doesn't. It records the mistake too. Brent then gave Dugan one more practical option. He told him there were direct numbers tied to the credentials, and that Dugan could contact federal supervisors instead of treating the situation like a street arrest. Dugan ignored that and started building a local case that made no sense. He talked about impersonation, obstruction, evasion. None of it fit what had actually happened. That's what happens when an officer starts with the conclusion and works backward. Backup arrived a few minutes later. Officer Lena Brooks came in first. She stepped out and looked at Brent in cuffs, looked at Dugan, then looked at the credentials Dugan had set on the hood of the patrol car. Her reaction was different right away. Not because she was smarter than everyone else, because she was still using her head. She asked Dugan what the underlying offense was. Dugan gave her a rushed version heavy on attitude and light on facts. Suspicious behavior, refusal to cooperate, possible fake federal ID. Brooks didn't look convinced. She picked up one of the credentials, examined it longer than Dugan had, and asked whether dispatch had run any verification. Dugan said he was handling it. That answer was another problem. He wasn't handling it. He was avoiding verification because verification could end his authority over the scene. Brent saw Brooks was more careful and directed his comments toward process. He identified himself again, told her he was on federal assignment, and said a supervisor or duty contact could confirm it immediately. He didn't plead, he didn't posture, he stayed factual. That also mattered later. He gave the department every chance to fix the mistake before it got bigger. Dugan didn't like Brooks slowing things down. He cut in, took control of the conversation again, and told her he believed Brent was bluffing. He had convinced himself that backing off now would make him look weak in front of another officer. That's the part that destroys the departments. Once the scene becomes about saving face, policy stops meaning much. Brooks finally pushed the issue and asked dispatch to run the credential information and contact numbers. Dugan should have done that before the cuffs went on. Instead, it happened after the detention and search were already underway. The response didn't come back instantly, but it came back fast enough to change the whole scene. Dispatch reported that one of the listed contact points connected to a valid federal office. Then the tone on the radio shifted. Shorter responses, more careful language. Somebody at the other end understood very quickly that local police might have a serious problem sitting in a grocery store parking lot. That's when Sergeant Dana Flores arrived. Flores had enough experience to read a scene in seconds. One man cuffed, no sign of struggle, no agitated crowd, no stolen property, no obvious crime. Two sets of federal-looking credentials on the hood. Dugan standing rigid and over-explaining before she even asked a full question. Officers who know what they're doing recognize that pattern fast. It usually means the officer who made the stop already knows he may have pushed too far. Flores separated the officers and got the facts in pieces. Dugan's version was still built around his personal belief that Brent had to be lying. Brooks gave a cleaner account and made it clear the credentials appeared legitimate enough to require formal verification before any detention should have happened. Nina Patel then told Flores that Brent had been calm the entire time and that Dugan had ignored her when she tried to explain there had been no disturbance in the store. That tightened the scene immediately. Flores took a closer look at the credentials and contacted the number herself. This time, the answer left very little room for fantasy. The office on the other end confirmed that Brent Cole was a Secret Service agent attached to a protective intelligence operation in the area. They also asked who had detained him and why. That was the moment the ground dropped out from under Dugan. His posture changed first. Officers always tell on themselves there. He stopped projecting control and started trying to explain himself. Not to Brent, not to the public, to his supervisor. That told the real story. His confidence had never been about certainty. It had been about dominance. And now that a higher authority had entered the picture, it disappeared. Flores ordered the handcuffs removed. Brent was uncuffed in the same parking lot where Dugan had tried to make an example out of him. Nobody on scene said much because there wasn't much to say. The damage had already been done. Brent had been detained without probable cause, searched without a lawful basis, and treated like a criminal after presenting valid federal credentials, on camera, in public, in front of witnesses. Dugan tried to shift into apology mode, but that never works when the facts are this bad. An apology doesn't erase an unlawful detention. It definitely doesn't erase a search. Brent adjusted his jacket, collected himself, and stayed professional. That probably saved the city from an even uglier scene right there. Then he made it clear that the issue is no longer just local. Federal supervisors would be contacted, reports would be preserved, video would matter. Every decision from the first contact forward would be reviewed. At that point, the local department stopped dealing with a grocery store call. It was dealing with exposure. After Brent was released, the issue moved out of the parking lot and into legal review. He didn't argue. He documented everything. Time of the stop. When Dugan first made contact. When the credentials were shown. When the cuffs went on. When the search happened. When the supervisor finally verified who he was. His own supervisors were notified the same day, so the local department already knew this would not stay internal. By that evening, the evidence trail was locked in. Bodycam footage was flagged. Dispatch audio was preserved. Store cameras were pulled. 2 customer videos were already moving around locally. That created a problem for the department fast, because the public could now see the basic facts without waiting for a press release. The first public line from the department framed it as a misunderstanding during a suspicious person investigation. That position didn't last. The footage showed Brent staying calm. It showed Dugan pushing the encounter forward without a clear legal basis. It showed several chances to verify the credentials before using force. He ignored all of them. Brent gave a formal statement through counsel and through his agency. He kept it factual. He stated that Dugan detained him without probable cause, searched him without lawful grounds, and rejected valid federal identification before making any serious effort to confirm it. The video supported that version closely. Then Dugan's history became relevant. Internal reviewers found prior complaints tied to escalation and poor judgment during citizen contacts. Some had been closed with little action. One earlier incident had already drawn a warning about stretching weak suspicion too far. On their own, those records might not have done much. In this case, they made the department look careless. It suggested Dugan had been showing the same pattern for a while, and nobody had stopped him. Internal Affairs opened a full investigation. Command staff did not have room to avoid it. A federal agency was now involved. Civil rights lawyers were watching. Local media had started asking for records. Once investigators lined up Dugan's report against Bodycam, dispatch logs, witness statements, and store video, the weaknesses were obvious. He inflated the suspicion. He described Brent as less cooperative than the footage showed. He tried to justify the detention after the fact. That is where officers usually lose credibility for good. Not only in the moment, on paper too. Brent then filed suit against Dugan in the department. The claims included unlawful detention, unlawful search, battery, civil rights violations, and emotional distress. The strength of the case was not flashy. It was simple. Dugan got a vague call. He approached aggressively. He was told Brent was federal law enforcement. He was shown credentials. He dismissed them. He detained and searched Brent anyway. Only later did a supervisor confirm that Brent had told the truth from the start. That sequence was enough to put the city in serious danger. The city's lawyers understood it early. A jury would not need much help with this one. A calm man identified himself, showed proof, and still got cuffed because an officer decided he had to be lying. Add Bodycam and witness video, and the city was staring at a very public loss. Discovery made the case worse for the department. Dugan's prior complaints came into play. Training records were reviewed. Supervisors were questioned about whether they had done enough after earlier warnings. The policy manual looked fine on paper. Actual enforcement looked weak. That gap matters in civil cases. Cities pay heavily when bad habits stay on the street long after supervisors should have acted. The Secret Service did not turn it into a public spectacle, but its involvement changed the pressure. Local agencies rely on trust with federal partners. This stop damaged that trust immediately, quietly at first, then across the whole chain. Dugan was placed on leave. That was just the first step. He later tried to defend himself as an officer making a hard call in an uncertain situation. That argument kept falling apart under review. The uncertainty came from his own refusal to verify what was right in front of him. Public reaction moved faster than the internal process. News coverage picked up the case. Civil rights attorneys pointed to the Fourth Amendment issues. Former officers said the same thing in plainer terms. Dugan turned a routine contact into a personal contest, and the city was going to pay for it. That is exactly what happened. Settlement talks became serious once the city saw how exposed it was. Brent had strong evidence, credible witnesses, a clean record, and federal backing. The city had video, prior complaints, and an officer whose judgment looked worse every time the timeline was reviewed. The case ended in a $5 million settlement paid by local taxpayers. Now the department still had to deal with Dugan himself. The lawsuit ended, but Dugan's career didn't survive it. Internal Affairs found that he made an unlawful detention, carried out an unjustified search, ignored valid credentials, and wrote the incident in a way the video did not support. He was fired. Then the state certification board reviewed the case. Dugan lost his certification, which meant he could not work as a police officer again. The department had problems too. Supervisors had to answer for earlier complaints against him and for letting his pattern continue. The city also had to explain why taxpayers were paying $5 million for one officer's ego. Brent did not go on a media tour. He went back to work. That helped him. He looked professional from start to finish, and the evidence backed him up completely. The case also forced changes. The department updated procedures for identity verification, detention decisions, and supervisor response when someone claims federal status. Local and federal coordination tightened after that. That is why this case mattered. Dugan thought he was asserting authority over a man in a parking lot. Instead, he turned a routine contact into a civil rights case, lost his job, lost his certification, and cost the city millions. The lesson is simple. Ego can destroy a cop's career faster than any suspect ever will. What would you have done if you saw this happen? Put it in the comments, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more.
Cool. Stand up and keep your hands where I can see them.
What is this about?
Complaint of disorderly behavior. Stand up.
Who made the complaint?
That's not your concern right now. Stand
So,
up.
you want to detain me?
Yes, while I figure this
Figure
out.
out what?
Man, this can go easy if you just cooperate.
Easy for who?
Enough. Stand up. I work for the federal.
What happens when street cops try to embarrass the exact kind of person who knows every rule they're supposed to follow? This was the kind of stop that looked bad in real time and somehow got worse every minute after that. Two patrol officers walked into a downtown lunch spot, picked the wrong woman, turned a weak call into a public arrest, and spent the next 10 minutes building the lawsuit that would gut their careers. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you like stories where power trips crash into facts, hit like and subscribe, because this one went all the way from a lunch table to a $20 million settlement. The woman at the center of it was Dana Mercer, 41, federal prosecutor, calm voice, sharp memory, zero interest in performing fear for men who confused a badge with unlimited authority. She wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, didn't need to be. By the time those officers put hands on her, they were already in deeper trouble than they understood. It started in a business district restaurant a few blocks from the federal courthouse. Lunch rush, lawyers, staffers, consultants, people on tight schedules, eating fast and checking phones. Normal place. Polished, expensive. Quiet enough that everybody noticed when police energy entered the room. Dana had taken a corner table on the patio. She was between hearings. Her briefcase was open beside her chair. A legal pad sat next to her plate. She'd been reviewing notes and answering a work call. That was it. No scene, no disturbance, no threat. Just a black woman in a suit speaking firmly into a phone and flipping through case papers in a place where half the room probably did the same thing every day. Somebody called it in anyway. Not because of a crime. Because she looked suspicious to the kind of person who sees confidence and starts inventing danger around it. Dispatch sent the call as a possible disturbance involving a woman refusing to leave. That was the first problem. The restaurant manager hadn't asked Donna to leave. No employee had reported a conflict. Nobody said she threatened anyone. By the time officers Brett Harlan and Luis Kessler arrived, they weren't responding to facts. They were responding to a vibe. And officers who start with vibes usually end with paperwork they can't defend. Harlan went first. That fit his pattern. He liked taking over scenes fast, talking hard, making people react to him. He stepped onto the patio and locked onto Dana, like he'd already chosen the ending. Kessler stayed half a step behind, doing what weak partners do in moments like that, watching a bad decision form and deciding not to interrupt it. Harlan told Dana to stand up and keep her hands visible. She looked at him, stayed seated, and asked what this was about. That should have slowed everything down. A competent officer would have explained the complaint, checked with staff, figured out whether there was even a lawful basis to detain her. That didn't happen. Harlan treated the question itself like disrespect. He told her again to stand up. He added that she was being detained while they investigated. Investigated what? That was the obvious question. Dana asked it. He didn't answer it cleanly because he didn't have a clean answer. He mentioned a complaint. He mentioned disorderly behavior. Then he told her to produce identification. Now the whole patio was watching. Dana didn't refuse in the dramatic way officers later claimed in their reports. She did something worse for them. She stayed controlled. She asked whether she was free to leave. She asked what specific crime he believed had occurred. She told him her identification was in her bag and said she was not consenting to any search of it without a lawful basis. That was when Harlan made the stop personal. He leaned in, changed his tone, made it clear this wasn't about solving anything. He wanted submission. Quick, public, obvious. He wanted her on her feet, compliant, smaller than him in front of a room full of strangers. Dana didn't give him that, and officers like Harlan always take that badly. Kessler tried a softer version of the same thing. He told her this could all be easy if she just cooperated. That line shows up in a lot of bad police encounters. It sounds reasonable. It isn't. What it really means is stop asking for your rights and let us control the scene. Dana told him again that she was willing to identify herself, but she wanted to know the legal basis for the detention first. Perfectly fair. Actually smarter than most people manage under pressure. She also told them she worked for the federal government. Harlan smirked at that. Big mistake. He told her everybody claimed to be important when police showed up. He said titles didn't matter on his scene. That little phrase came back later like a hammer, because now he'd said the quiet part out loud. He wasn't checking facts. He was punishing resistance. The restaurant manager, Maya Chen, came out by then. She tried to explain that Dana had done nothing wrong and that nobody from the restaurant had asked for police intervention. Harlan cut her off. Bad move again. He didn't want information. He wanted control of the narrative before facts could ruin it. One customer had already started recording, then another, then another. You could feel the whole thing shift. People stopped pretending this was normal. They could see the officers weren't calming a problem. They were creating one. Dana reached slowly toward her bag and said she was retrieving identification. Harlan grabbed her wrist. That was the moment the stop crossed into a real legal disaster. He later claimed officer safety. Officers always run to that when the video looks ugly. But Bodycam and witness footage told a cleaner story. She'd moved slowly. She'd announced what she was doing. She was seated. No threat indicators, no weapon claim, no aggressive movement. He just didn't like that she was still acting like an equal participant in the encounter instead of a subject. Dana pulled her arm back and told him not to touch her without cause. Harlan took that as resistance, or pretended to. Hard to tell with men like that. Sometimes they know exactly what they're doing. Sometimes ego blinds them so fast they start believing their own misconduct in real time. He ordered her up from the chair. Kessler moved in. Between them, they pulled her to her feet while she kept saying she was not resisting and wanted a supervisor. People on the patio started objecting. Maya said again there had been no disturbance. One man identified himself as an attorney and told the officers they were making a mistake. Harlan snapped at him to stay out of it. That's another thing officers with fragile authority never understand. Public scenes don't stay private just because they want them to. Once you start dragging a professional woman out of a chair in the middle of lunch, everybody becomes a witness. They turned her, cuffed her, and walked her through the restaurant. That part did the damage nobody at City Hall could later undo. A federal prosecutor, in handcuffs, in front of courthouse staff, private attorneys, restaurant employees, and a row of raised phones. Humiliation like that doesn't disappear because a department writes a defensive report later. It settles into memory, into video, into civil claims, into juries. Outside, Harlan searched her bag. No warrant, no consent, no actual foundation strong enough to survive serious review. He found the identification almost immediately. Federal credentials, not a bluff, not a game. The exact thing she'd been telling them from the start. Kessler saw it first, and that was the first crack. His posture changed. Small but visible. He looked at Harlan, then at the credential, then back at Dana, like his brain had finally caught up to the scene. This wasn't some vague street stop with no consequences. They had just handcuffed a federal prosecutor after ignoring staff, ignoring witnesses, ignoring her explanation, and putting their hands on her without a clean legal basis. A smart officer would have ended it right there. Uncuff. Apologize. Call a supervisor. Start damage control. Harlan wasn't smart in the moments that mattered. He doubled down. He said credentials could be fake. Said they were taking her in until everything checked out. That was pure ego. Desperate ego. The kind that turns one bad choice into 5 because the man making them cannot stand the idea of backing up in front of a crowd. By the time Sergeant Nolan Pike arrived, the body cams had already captured enough to sink half a defense. Pike got a fast version from Harlan, not an honest one. Complaint, non-compliance, possible interference, suspicious behavior. The usual pile of vague words officers use when the actual facts don't help them. Dana, still cuffed, gave Pike the simple version. She'd been eating lunch. She'd asked for the basis of the stop. She'd offered identification from her bag. Harlan grabbed her, cuffed her, searched the bag, and ignored her federal credentials when he found them. Pike had a choice right there. Be a supervisor, or be a shield. He chose shield. He told the officers to transport her. Again, bad move. Huge one? Because now this wasn't one patrol officer losing control. This was a chain of command failure. One ego had become 3. And here was the part none of them understood yet. Dana Mercer didn't need to win the argument on the sidewalk. That part was over. She just needed them to keep making decisions on camera. Every extra minute helped her. Every order, every contradiction, every witness they brushed aside. They thought they were tightening control. Really, they were writing exhibits. As they put her in the back of the cruiser, Dana stopped trying to convince them. That phase had passed. She shifted to memory, names, badge numbers, sequence, exact language. Timestamps, who interrupted whom, who searched what, who ignored the restaurant manager, who saw the credentials and kept going. That's what made the whole thing deadly for the department later. She wasn't panicking. She was preserving. By the time the cruiser pulled away from the restaurant, Maya had already saved the security footage. 2 attorneys had exchanged numbers with witnesses. One courthouse employee had recognized Dana and started making calls. Inside the car, Kessler sat in silence. Harlan kept performing certainty. Pike told dispatch they were bringing in a detainee for identification verification. A detainee, not an arrestee, not a suspect tied to a clear offense, just a person that humiliated in public because none of them had the discipline to stop. In downtown, a few blocks from the federal courthouse, the first calls were already reaching people with enough authority to make this a career-ending afternoon. The ride to the precinct was the last stretch where those officers still thought they could control the story. That ended the second Dana got through booking. The desk staff recognized the name before Harlan could finish dressing up the arrest. Not because federal prosecutors were celebrities, because downtown systems overlap. Courthouse people know each other. Agency names travel fast. Credentials matter. And once one booking officer saw who she was, the room changed, not in a dramatic movie way, in the real way. People got quieter. Screens got checked twice. Somebody stopped treating the paperwork like routine. Somebody else made a call they probably wished they didn't have to make. Harlan kept pushing the same version. Disorderly conduct. Failure to comply. Suspicious behavior. Interference with an investigation. That stack of vague garbage had carried him through plenty of street stops before. It didn't work here because Dana knew exactly how weak each label was. She didn't argue like a civilian trying to get out of trouble. She corrected the record like a lawyer building one. She stated the timeline. She identified the lack of probable cause. She flagged the unlawful bag search. She pointed out that the restaurant manager had contradicted the call basis on scene. She noted that the officers found valid federal credentials and kept her in cuffs anyway. Then she asked for their names again, the supervisor's name again, and the Bodycam preservation process. That last part hit hard. Now, the booking people knew what kind of problem had landed on their desk. This wasn't a messy arrest they could clean up with a disorderly citation and a shrug. This was a constitutional claim with witnesses, surveillance, and a plaintiff who understood discovery better than the city attorneys who would later inherit it. Within 30 minutes, phone traffic started moving above the station level. A supervisor from Dana's office called, then another. Then someone from Federal Protective Services started asking why a federal prosecutor had been cuffed on a lunch break over a call nobody could clearly explain. That's when the panic started breaking through the swagger. Kessler felt it first. He stopped talking much, stopped making eye contact, stopped acting like the stop had been clean. People like him always collapse inward when the cover story starts slipping. He'd gone along with Harlan on the sidewalk because that was easy. At the station with forms, names, and internal recordings in play, it didn't feel easy anymore. Harlan went the other way. He got louder, more rigid, more convinced that forceful repetition could turn weak facts into strong ones. It couldn't. It just made him look worse. Pike tried to split the difference. He started talking about mistaken identity and officer caution. That didn't help either. The officers hadn't made a reasonable mistake and then corrected it. They'd ignored correction after correction. That's what killed them later. One bad assumption can sometimes survive review. Doubling down after the facts arrive usually can't. Dana was released that evening. No charges, no coherent explanation, no real apology. Just a rushed exit built around damage control. That made things worse. Always does. Because when a department cuffs someone in public, drags them through booking, then quietly lets them go with nothing, it confirms exactly what the plaintiff's lawyer wants a jury to hear. They had power. They used it badly, then they ran out of nerve. Dana didn't go home and try to forget it. She got organized. By that night, the preservation letters were drafted, restaurant footage, body cam files, dash cam, dispatch audio, CAD logs, booking video, internal radio traffic, incident reports, supplemental reports, complaint history, training records, supervisory review trail. She and the lawyers who circled around her moved fast because experienced people know departments lose memory when evidence gets expensive. The next morning, the first local story hit. A federal prosecutor had been arrested at lunch after questioning officers about the legal basis for her detention. Witnesses said the restaurant had never asked police to remove her. Video showed officers searching her bag, finding credentials, and still hauling her away. That story exploded because it had everything: public humiliation, weak police logic, clean video, a powerful profession on the receiving end of street-level arrogance. And underneath all that, the question every normal person asks in a case like this: if they did this to someone who knew the law cold, what did they do to everybody else? Then other names started surfacing. A civil rights group dug into complaint records and found Harlan had already collected a reputation inside the department. Not enough to end his career. Enough to show a pattern: aggressive stops, shaky justifications, citizen complaints that went nowhere, supervisors smoothing rough edges instead of addressing the core problem. Same old story. A guy keeps pushing because the system keeps teaching him he can. That turned Dana's case from a bad arrest into a city problem. The lawsuit landed 6 months later, and it was brutal. Not loud, not theatrical, just precise. False arrest, unlawful detention, unlawful search, retaliatory escalation, failure to intervene, supervisory liability, municipal liability tied to ignored warning signs, state law claims on top, emotional distress, reputational harm, professional harm, violation after violation lined up in order. The city tried the usual first move. It asked for patience, promised review, and acted like facts were still developing. That posture lasted until discovery started. Then the wheels came off. Maya Chen gave a clean statement and never wavered. She said Dana had been calm, said the restaurant had not called for removal, said she personally told officers there was no disturbance. That alone hurt them. Then the witness videos came in. Same problem. Dana stayed seated, announced her movement toward the bag, asked basic legal questions. Harlan escalated anyway. Then came the body cams. That was the funeral. Not because body cam always tells the whole truth. It doesn't. Angles miss things. Audio drops. Officers forget to position themselves honestly. But in this case, the recordings were bad enough. You could hear the impatience. You could hear the dismissal when Dana identified herself. You could hear the shift from investigation to punishment. At one point, Harlan practically admitted the stop had become a contest over compliance. That line got replayed in depositions until even the city's lawyers stopped pretending it had an innocent meaning. Kessler sank during deposition. He tried to say Dana made sudden movements. Video undercut that. He tried to say they feared for safety. The scene undercut that. He tried to say they only learned her identity later. The bag search undercut that. Then the lawyers walked him through timestamps, frame by frame. By the end, he looked like what he was, a man who tied himself to a bad officer and discovered too late that loyalty is expensive when the video works. Pike did no better. He claimed he relied on his officers. Fair enough up to a point. Then the plaintiff's team asked why he transported anyway, after hearing the restaurant manager contradict the call basis, and after learning valid federal credentials had already been found. He had no good answer. Supervisors hate that moment. Rank stops helping. It becomes obvious they weren't managing risk. They were protecting their own. The city attorney's office changed tone after that. Quietly at first, then completely. Because by then they'd also reviewed internal material the public hadn't seen yet. Prior complaints against Harlan. Intervention chances that went nowhere. Weak supervisory notes. Training acknowledgments that contradicted how the officers behaved. The city could no longer sell this as a split-second misunderstanding. It looked exactly like what it was. A preventable abuse of authority carried out by officers who thought nobody in the moment could hold them to the law. Settlement talks got serious once the damages picture fully opened up. And the damages were big. Bigger than people think in these cases. Dana wasn't just embarrassed for 5 minutes on a sidewalk. She was handcuffed in front of legal peers, dragged through a station, treated like a liar after presenting real credentials, and forced into a fight over her professional reputation by people who had no lawful reason to start it. Add the constitutional claims, the public record, the city exposure on supervision, and the pattern evidence. 20 million stopped sounding crazy. It started sounding like the number the city had to pay to avoid a worse number later. When the settlement finally hit, it landed like a bomb in City Hall. $20 million. No spin could fix that. Taxpayers understood it immediately. This wasn't an accident bill. This was an ego bill, a badge bill, a nobody told them no bill. Then the career started ending. Harlan was terminated first. The department couldn't carry him after the Bodycam review, the report inconsistencies, and the deposition record. His certification review followed. Then a referral for criminal evaluation tied to false statements and misconduct in office. Whether prosecutors wanted that fight or not, his policing life was done. No decent department was touching him after that file. Kessler resigned before the final discipline hearing. That saved him a public firing, not his reputation. Everybody knew why he left. He'd had several chances to stop the train and chose cowardice every time. Pike lost rank, then lost the job entirely. A supervisor who ratifies nonsense on scene and then backs bad paperwork afterward becomes radioactive once a city writes a $20 million check. Nobody wants that man in command after that. The fallout kept moving upward. Command staff took heat for ignoring warning signs. The mayor got dragged into press conferences. The police chief had to answer why prior complaints didn't trigger meaningful intervention. That's the part departments hate most. One street stop turns into a microscope on the whole chain. And yes, policy changes followed. They always do when money gets that high. The city tightened detention standards, required clearer articulation before non-custodial encounters became forcible ones, expanded body cam preservation rules, forced supervisors to review retaliatory arrest indicators, added scenario training on lawful stops, citizen questioning, and professional identification verification. Useful changes. Also late. They usually are. Dana took the settlement, but she didn't turn into a public victory lap person. She went back to work. That felt more serious than a press tour. She let the records speak. Let the filings speak. Let the city's own signatures speak. People around her said she got quieter after it happened. Not weaker, sharper, less patient with institutional excuses. That tracks. Encounters like that change how someone sees the distance between the law on paper and the law on the street. The ugliest truth in the whole story sat right there in plain view. Dana got justice partly because she had status, knowledge, witnesses, and resources. She knew how to preserve evidence. She knew how to force accountability. She knew who to call and what to ask for. A lot of people don't. They get the same stop, the same humiliation, the same garbage report, and then they hit a wall. That's why this case mattered beyond one prosecutor and 3 bad cops. It showed the mechanism. Not just the misconduct, the mechanism. 3 officers thought lunch was the easy part of their day. Instead, they walked into a public record they couldn't bully, a target who understood the rules better than they did, and a city payout big enough to make everybody finally pay attention. That's the story. So what would you have done in that situation? And have you ever seen someone with authority keep pushing just because they couldn't stand being questioned? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share the story with somebody who gets it, and subscribe for more stories like this.
What's in the bag?
A charger, a drink, gum.
You pay for it?
Yes, sir.
Receipt.
It's in my pocket.
Hey, don't reach.
You asked for it.
Hands where I can see them.
Okay, I paid for it. I was just trying to show you.
Why were you hanging around electronics?
I was picking the charger.
Why are you nervous?
Can I call my dad?
No, not yet.
Officer Ryan Haskell believed he controlled that parking lot. Then he detained a 13-year-old boy for a theft that never happened, ignored the receipt that would have ended the stop, and kept pushing after the facts were already against him. He did not know the boy was Evan Mercer, the son of Daniel Mercer, the incoming Metropolitan Police Chief. That mistake did not stay a routine field stop. It became the kind of case that can end a career. Tell me where you're watching from: city, state, or country. And if you like stories about abuse of authority getting exposed through facts, recordings, and accountability, like the video and subscribe. This started in a retail plaza in a large American city. There was a pharmacy, a coffee shop, a nail salon, and a dry cleaner. It was busy enough for witnesses and covered well enough with cameras that nobody should have felt safe cutting corners. Officers still did it there. Places like that made some of them careless because they assumed the scene would look calm from a distance. Evan Mercer was 13 years old. He was quiet, careful, and used to paying attention. He had been raised by a father who understood exactly how street encounters could turn bad. Daniel Mercer had not become Metropolitan Police Chief yet, but the appointment was public, and the transition had already started. He had told his son the basic rules more than once. Keep your hands visible. Speak clearly. Do not argue in public with an officer. Do not make sudden movements. Let facts do the work. On that afternoon, Evan stopped at the pharmacy after school. He needed a phone charger. He also bought a drink and gum. He used self-checkout, paid, took the printed receipt, and put it in his pocket. There was nothing complicated about it. The problem started because a newer employee noticed him standing near the electronics rack for a little longer than most customers did. The employee mentioned it to the store manager, Priya Shah. She did what a competent manager was supposed to do. She checked the area and looked into the transaction record. She had not confirmed a theft. She had not identified missing merchandise. She was still checking when the call that reached police got simplified into something much looser and much more dangerous. A suspicious juvenile was possibly shoplifting. That kind of call leaves room for a bad officer to build his own story. Officer Ryan Haskell took the call. He had a reputation for aggressive retail stops and a habit of treating pressure like investigation. He liked fast compliance. He liked being the loudest person in a scene. He called himself proactive. Supervisors use more careful language because departments do that when they are not ready to admit the real issue. The real issue was simple. He often decided what happened before he had enough facts to say it. By the time Haskell arrived, Evan had already left the store and was crossing the lot with a pharmacy bag in one hand and a backpack over one shoulder. Haskell got out of the patrol car and stopped him before he reached the sidewalk. He asked what was in the bag. Evan answered him. He asked whether he had paid for the items. Evan said yes. He asked for the receipt. Evan said it was in his pocket and started to reach for it. Haskell immediately told him not to move so fast. That was the first point where the stop could still have been corrected easily. A reasonable officer would have let the boy explain, watched his hands, and verified the purchase. Haskell went the other way. He treated nervousness like guilt. He treated a normal movement toward a receipt like a threat or an excuse. Evan stopped moving and kept his hands visible. He said again that he had paid and that the receipt was in his pocket. Haskell did not slow down. He asked why Evan had been standing near the electronics section. He asked why he was alone. He asked what was in the backpack. He asked why he looked nervous. He kept stacking questions quickly, which is a common tactic when an officer wants control more than clarity. A young person gets rattled. The officer calls that evasive behavior. Then the officer uses the same pressure he created as proof that the stop was justified. Evan stayed respectful. He gave short answers. He did not raise his voice. None of that mattered because Haskell had already settled on the version he wanted. He saw a black boy, a charger, a backpack, and a possible theft call. He filled in the rest on his own. Priya Shah came out of the store when she realized police had stopped the same customer who had just checked out. She tried to explain that there was no confirmed theft. She told Haskell the purchase could be verified through the register. He cut her off and kept his attention on the boy. That decision hurt him later. He had already been offered the easiest way to verify the facts, and he rejected it. Evan again told him the receipt was in his pocket and tried to indicate where it was. Haskell grabbed his arm, turned him toward the patrol car, and told him to stop making it worse. Now other people started paying attention. A woman loading groceries stopped and pulled out her phone. A delivery driver near the coffee shop began recording as well. One of the pharmacy employees stood near the entrance and watched Priya Shah try again to explain that the purchase had likely already been made. Haskell told her to stay back. The pattern was clear by then. Every fact that could have ended the stop was treated like interference. Evan did not resist. He did not pull away. He did not yell. He said he paid for the charger and asked to call his father. Haskell treated that request like defiance. He took control of the backpack and searched it himself. Inside were school papers, a notebook, a pencil case, and gym clothes. There was nothing stolen inside. There was nothing hidden inside. There was no support for the theft claim at all. A competent officer would have ended it there. Haskell shifted to a different justification. He started talking about suspicious behavior and concealment. Officers do that when the original reason for the stop falls apart and they still want to hold the scene. The problem for him was that the facts had already become too clean. A paid purchase, a receipt available, a manager trying to verify the transaction, and an empty backpack as far as stolen goods were concerned. He had nothing solid left. Priya Shah came back out with the transaction record. She had the timestamp and item list. She stated directly that the charger, drink, and gum had been paid for. Haskell still did not release the boy. That was the worst part of the stop. A single bad suspicion can sometimes be explained. Continuing after the evidence clears, the person is where the stop starts looking deliberate. He had been corrected by the store manager, by the purchase record, and by the search results. He still kept a child pinned to a patrol car in public. Then he asked for the boy's full name. Evan gave it. Haskell asked for the father's name. Evan told him Daniel Mercer. Haskell did not take that seriously. He acted like the boy was trying to scare him off with an important name. He called the name into dispatch while keeping Evan in place. Dispatch asked him to repeat it. He repeated it. A few seconds later, they asked him to repeat it again, slower this time. That changed the tone of the stop. Haskell did not understand the full problem yet, but he felt it. The radio lost its casual rhythm. Dispatch became careful. The supervisor's attention came quickly after that. Sergeant Lena Ortiz called him directly and asked whether he had confirmed stolen property. He had not. She asked whether the store manager verified payment. He admitted that she had said the items were paid for. She asked whether the juvenile's parent had been contacted. He said no. She asked whether this boy was being physically detained. His answer was incomplete, which told her enough. Ortiz said she was on her way. By then, the parking lot had gone quiet. The bystanders kept recording. Priya Shah stopped arguing and started watching closely. Evan stayed controlled, but he looked shaken. Haskell still tried to hold the posture of a man in charge, but it was beginning to crack. Dispatch came back once more and told him to hold the scene for a supervisor. That was when the name finally landed with him. Daniel Mercer was not just a random parent, he was the incoming Metropolitan Police Chief. He was the man the department had been talking about for weeks. He was the man who would soon have authority over discipline, command decisions, and internal review. And Officer Ryan Haskell had his 13-year-old son pressed against a patrol car over a theft that had already been disproved. Haskell looked at Evan again. Same school hoodie, same backpack, same pharmacy bag. Nothing about the boy had changed. Only the officer's understanding had changed. And by then, it was far too late. Sergeant Lena Ortiz arrived within minutes. She stepped out and looked at Evan Mercer against the patrol car, looked at the store manager holding the transaction record, and understood the situation fast. Officer Haskell had started with a weak theft suspicion and turned it into a physical detention of a child after the evidence had already moved against him. She asked him one direct question. She wanted to know whether he had confirmed any stolen property. He had not. She asked Priya Shah whether the items had been paid for. Shah told her they had. She showed her the register record with the time, the item list, and the payment. Ortiz then asked whether Evan had been allowed to call a parent. He had not. She asked whether Haskell had searched the backpack. He had. She asked whether that search found stolen property. It had not. That was enough. She told Haskell to step away from the boy. He started explaining himself before he moved. That made him look worse. He was still trying to control the story when a supervisor had already taken control of the scene. Ortiz repeated the order. This time he stepped back. She turned to Evan and asked whether he was injured. He said he was not injured, but he was shaken. She asked him for a short account of what happened. He gave it in order. He said he paid inside. He said he tried to show the receipt. He said the officer grabbed him before he could take it out. He said he asked to call his father and was not allowed. That was a clean statement. It matched the manager's account and the basic timeline already forming around the stop. Ortiz then told Evan he could call his father. Daniel Mercer answered immediately. Evan told him he had been stopped outside the pharmacy over something he paid for. He told him a supervisor was there now. Mercer asked whether he was safe at that moment. Evan said yes. Mercer said he was coming. That was when Haskell understood he no longer had room to fix this in the field. Up to that point, he was still operating on instinct. He was still hoping procedure and tone would cover the weakness of the stop. Once the father was on the way and the supervisor had already heard the basics, the situation changed. This was no longer about whether he could keep control of a child in a parking lot. It was about whether his report could survive contact with body camera footage, store records, witness video, and command review. He tried to improve his position. He told Ortiz the juvenile had acted nervously. He said the movement toward the pocket raised concerns. He said he was investigating possible concealment. He said the totality of the circumstances justified the stop. None of it helped. Every explanation came after the key facts. The purchase had been verified. The backpack had nothing in it. The child had asked to show a receipt and was blocked from doing it. The store manager had tried to correct him more than once. Those details did not leave much room for creative reporting. A black SUV pulled into the lot a few minutes later. Daniel Mercer stepped out and walked straight to his son. He did not stop at Haskell first. He did not make a scene. He checked Evan's arms, face, and posture. He asked whether Haskell had handcuffed him. Evan said no, but he said the officer grabbed him and held him against the car. Mercer asked whether he had been allowed to show the receipt. Evan said no. He asked whether the store had confirmed payment. Evan said the manager tried to tell the officer that. Mercer then turned to Ortiz and asked whether his son was free to leave. Ortiz said yes. He asked whether the department had any evidence of theft. Ortiz said no. That answer settled the public part of the scene. Evan was no longer being detained. The problem for Haskell was that the stop did not end when the detention ended. It moved into a more dangerous stage. Mercer asked Shaw whether the store would preserve all footage and the transaction record. She said yes. He looked toward the bystanders recording and understood immediately that the stop had already left the control of the officer who started it. There were now multiple records of the same event. That usually decides these cases before the paperwork even begins. Then Mercer addressed Haskell. He did not threaten him. He did not raise his voice. He asked narrow questions in a calm tone. He asked when the officer first had probable cause for a theft detention. He asked what specific stolen item had been identified. He asked why the stop continued after the manager confirmed payment. He asked why a juvenile had been denied immediate parent contact while being physically controlled in public. Haskell tried answering, but the sequence hurt him. A bad stop can sound forceful in real time. It sounds very different when someone breaks it into steps and asks what fact justified each step. He had no good answer for the moment he grabbed the boy. He had no good answer for the bag search after the boy said the receipt was in his pocket. He had no good answer for continuing the detention after the transaction was verified. Mercer did not drag it out. He told Ortiz that every recording tied to the stop needed preservation orders immediately. He included body camera footage, vehicle camera footage, store surveillance, dispatch traffic, and the incident call record. He told her the watch commander needed notice before the end of the hour. He also told her internal affairs had to be informed that same evening. Haskell stood there and watched the stop turn into evidence management around him. That was the real turn. He had started the encounter, assuming the badge on his chest gave him the final word. Now his own chain of command was moving to secure the record before he could shape it. Mercer took Evan to the SUV, but he did not leave immediately. He stayed long enough to make one point very clear. He told Ortiz that the case should not be treated differently because his son was involved. It should be treated exactly the way any case should be treated. When an officer detained a minor without confirming the offense, ignored proof of purchase, and kept escalating after being corrected. That point traveled through the department fast. It mattered because officers often expect quiet protection when they embarrass the agency. Mercer cut that off before it started. He was not offering a private resolution. He was telling the department to follow the facts all the way through. By the end of the shift, Haskell had to submit a formal statement. The first review went badly for him. Body camera footage showed Evan staying respectful. It showed him trying to explain the receipt. It showed Priya Shah attempting to verify the purchase. It showed the backpack search producing nothing. It showed Haskell keep physical control after the stop had already lost its basis. The dispatch log hurt him too. It showed when the father's name was run. It showed how the tone changed once the identity became clear. It showed the supervisor arriving before the officer corrected anything on his own. That last part mattered a lot. He could not claim he quickly fixed an honest mistake. The footage showed the opposite. He stayed committed until supervision forced the stop to reverse. Late that night, Haskell got a call from the watch commander telling him he was being placed on administrative leave pending formal review. That is where officers start realizing whether a department is about to protect them or cut them loose. He tried calling people he thought might soften it. A former supervisor, a union contact, another officer who owed him favors. He kept using the same defense. He said it was a retail theft investigation that got politically sensitive because of the family name. That argument sounded better in his head than it did on paper. The family name did not create the misconduct. It just removed his ability to bury it. By the next morning, senior command had reviewed the basic facts. The case was already bigger than one parking lot stop. The first question inside the department was no longer whether Haskell handled one child badly. The first question was how many other stops like this existed in his history that nobody had pulled apart because the family at the center did not have power. That question was dangerous for him, because once a department starts asking it, they do not stop at one report. Once the department opened Officer Haskell's record, the stop in the pharmacy lot stopped looking like one bad decision and started looking like a pattern. Internal Affairs pulled his body camera history, complaint file, stop reports, and use of force reviews. They focused on retail stops, juvenile contacts, and encounters that started with weak suspicion and ended with physical control. That review moved fast because the incoming chief's son was involved. But the findings did not depend on that fact. The findings depended on paperwork, footage, and numbers. Haskell had more than one prior complaint for rough treatment during low-level stops. Most had gone nowhere. A few had been closed as not sustained because there was no clear video, no independent witness, or no supervisor willing to push it further. On paper, that gave him cover. Under a full review, it gave investigators a trail. They found repeated problems. He escalated quickly. He stretched vague suspicion into prolonged detentions. He used words like evasive, furtive, and uncooperative in reports, where the footage showed fear more than resistance. He often framed ordinary movement as a threat once he needed a reason to justify getting physical. It was the same method again and again. Decide first, build the language later. That review changed the case. Now, the issue is not only what he did to Evan Mercer. The issue is whether supervisors had been ignoring warning signs because the people on the receiving end had less power, less money, and less access. Daniel Mercer understood that immediately. He did not treat the case as a private family matter. He did not want a quiet apology and a transfer. He pushed for a full administrative review and made it clear that the department would either examine the pattern honestly or admit it had been protecting bad street work. That made people nervous all over headquarters. By the end of the week, Haskell was still on an administrative leave. His badge and weapon had been surrendered, and his union representative was involved in every formal interview. He tried the same defense one more time. He said he responded to a possible shoplifting call, encountered a nervous juvenile, and acted in good faith under uncertain conditions. That defense collapsed when investigators laid out the timeline. First, there was no confirmed theft before he stopped Evan. Second, Evan told him he had a receipt. Third, the store manager attempted to verify the purchase almost immediately. Fourth, the backpack search found no stolen property. Fifth, Haskell still continued the detention. Sixth, he denied or delayed parent contact for a minor while physically controlling him in public. Seventh, he only lost momentum when dispatch verified the father's name and a supervisor arrived. That sequence was devastating because it stripped away every excuse. An honest mistake should get weaker as the facts come in and then stop. Haskell did the opposite. He got corrected and pushed harder. The case then moved outside the department. Mercer hired outside counsel for his son. That was another bad sign for the city. Once experienced civil rights lawyers reviewed the footage, they saw the same thing internal affairs had already seen. Weak cause, unnecessary physical detention, a minor. Clear exculpatory evidence ignored in real time, public humiliation, a strong argument for selective enforcement and profiling. The city law department knew what that meant. This was no longer a case they could defend cheaply. The footage also leaked. It did not take long. One bystander video reached local media first. Then body camera details started appearing in reporting. The public reaction was immediate because the facts were simple enough for anyone to follow. A child bought a charger, a drink, and gum. A patrolman stopped him, refused to check the receipt properly, grabbed him, searched his bag, ignored the store manager, and kept going until he learned who the father was. The worst part for the department was obvious. People started asking the same question everywhere. If that boy had not been the chief's son, would anything have happened to the officer at all? The department had no good answer to that. Community groups picked up the case. So did defense attorneys who had seen Haskell's name before. A few former complainants came forward after seeing the news. One man said Haskell had detained him outside a convenience store the year before on almost the same theory. Another family said their teenage nephew had been searched during a bicycle stop with no citation and no follow-up. Separately, those complaints had gone nowhere. Together, they started to look like a map. The city moved toward damage control. Haskell was called into a final disciplinary conference. He attended with union representation. Investigators laid out policy violations tied to unlawful detention, failure to de-escalate, improper juvenile handling, inaccurate or misleading reporting language, and conduct unbecoming. He tried to defend the stop as a split-second field judgment. That argument was weak because the footage showed multiple chances to stop and multiple choices to continue. The department terminated him. That alone would have been serious, but it did not stop there. The State Certification Board received the case file for decertification review. That put his future in law enforcement at risk beyond one department. Once that process started, his career was effectively over. Even before the board finished, no serious agency was going to touch an officer whose misconduct file now included a high-profile juvenile detention, public video, and a pattern review that exposed repeated problems. The civil case ended the way cases like this usually end when the facts are bad enough. The city settled. The settlement was large, and it came with more than money. Evan Mercer's legal team pushed for formal policy changes, recorded training requirements, and an independent audit of juvenile stop procedures. The city agreed to a package that included financial compensation for Evan, mandatory retraining on retail theft investigations, revised juvenile contact rules, stricter evidence preservation requirements, and an early warning review system for officers with repeated complaint patterns. That part mattered more than the headline number. A settlement closes one case. Policy changes admit the case revealed something real. Daniel Mercer used the incident in his first months as chief to force changes inside the department. Officers could no longer stretch a vague, suspicious person call into a full detention without documented cause. Juvenile stops required faster guardian notification. Supervisors had to review body camera footage in any public detention of a minor involving no arrest. Language and reports got more scrutiny, especially the usual vague terms officers use to hide weak facts. Mercer also reopened review standards for repeated low-level complaints that had been ignored because each one looked small on its own. That made enemies for him inside the department, but he did not care. He had seen what happened when a child did everything right and still got treated like a suspect because one patrolman trusted his own assumptions more than facts. Evan recovered, but the stop stayed with him. Not because he had been injured badly, because he learned early what a uniform can do when the wrong person wears it. He also learned something else. Records matter, witnesses matter, procedure matters, calm matters. The truth does not always win in the moment, but it gets stronger when the evidence holds. Officer Haskell thought he was dealing with one nervous kid outside a pharmacy. He was really exposing the way he worked in front of cameras, witnesses, supervisors, lawyers, the city, and the next chief of police. That was the mistake. Not just grabbing the wrong boy. Showing the whole system exactly what he had probably been doing to people who could not fight back. That is why his career collapsed so fast once the review started. The stop was bad. The record behind it was worse.